Hey Amir, good morning from me. How are you doing today?
Very good. How are you doing, Reed?
Doing pretty well. Appreciate you coming on today and talking to us about some of your roles with the launch of this Fabric platform. So I really appreciate you coming on.
No, thank you so much, and I'm really excited to be here today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's been a year of a lot of really cool changes and updates and enhancements for sure. Even excluding some of the AI revolutions that have been happening. And also just I think some of my increasing interactions with both the product team and a lot of the people kind of managing and evolving this platform. I know we've interacted a couple of times over the years through the MVP program and everything else. So I'm glad to be able to get one of the higher ups who's been in charge of some of the broader vision of this onto the stream to be able to talk about some of these. So yeah,
Okay, so let's go.
yeah, absolutely. I think as I do with all of my streams, though, I'd love a chance just to go into a little bit of a background with you, give the audience a chance to get to know who you are, how you've been involved in the launch of this, and also just to a degree where you've come from. So I did do a little bit of digging because I was curious, kind of some of that history, and I know that you've been Microsoft with Microsoft now for a couple of decades, but I think your love for tech and both hardware and software started back when you were still in school back home in Israel, right?
Yeah. So wow, we're talking about ancient history now, but yes,
Yeah.
the year is 1980. I think that's kind of how far back I go. Many of your listeners here or viewers, you probably haven't been born then. But yeah, I fell in love with computing actually 1976. I think when I was 10 years old, I was in a university enrichment program, and they took us to the mainframe room of the university, and
Okay.
I created my first Fortran program on punch cards. People actually
Oh
did not
yeah,
have
yeah, yeah.
monitors then, and I fell in love. I could, for years later, before I had my first PC, I could recite that first program that basically had a loop that printed a number from 1 to 100. I could recite it in memory. And as a child, I was so impressed with the fact that I could actually instruct the machine to do something for me, and that stayed with me. And yeah, then I got my first PC. Actually, it was an Apple II. It's not the PC as we know it today, and and become an instructor for programming and built my own business when I was 16. And so, yeah, it was such a weird period. It's everything went, everything you could do, anything you want, um, and it was the PC industry was just starting, absolutely just starting.
And at least for some of what I read, is it sounds like you even took a bit of kind of existing code and wrote your own like word processing software back in the day, or
Yeah, so you have to remember that we're talking about Israel, 1980, 1984, and uh, the whole notion of intellectual property did not exist. Like what we know as
sure, sure.
IP laws did not even exist then. So anybody can take any code they wanted and do whatever they wanted with the code. And in Israel, those who don't know, we write in Hebrew and actually goes from right to left rather than
Hmm.
left to right. And so all the word processors, the English word processors, were going the wrong direction. So I took some code and converted it to be right to left and added a bunch of Hebrew features to it. And in fact, uh, those who don't know the Apple II, which is probably the most of you, don't even know that there was no GUI. Everything was character based, and there are only 40 characters on the screen. So you cannot even have a single line that could go end to end on the screen. Basically every line that you read today in a document was broken into two lines because you need about 72 characters to
Yeah, yeah.
hold one readable line in a book or in a document. So I actually took and there were these kind of extension cards for the Apple II that would turn the screen from 40 characters to 80 characters wide, and I went and pre-programmed the chips on those extension cards to have Hebrew characters on them. So this was a weird period. Programmers not only knew how to write programs, but also knew how to take the hardware, understand the hardware, take the chips out, change them, and put them back in. It was really a hacker's paradise.
Well, this is, I think, I mean, at the time where I'm assuming that the transistors and the circuit boards and everything else were like, to a degree, you could by hand probably modify them. They weren't nearly as microscopic as they are now in terms of their So you could reconfigure circuit boards.
If you had the reference manual of the Apple II that was sent to every user of the Apple II, it included the electrical diagram of the Apple II. You can, and I was actually studying electronics in high school at the time, so I could actually open up the electronics, the electric diagram of the Apple II and understand how it actually worked. Something I can never do today. You probably cannot do that for the last few decades, but then it was possible. So you actually understood every chip, what it was doing, and how everything was connected to everything else. And as I said, if you knew a little bit about electronics, you can figure out how a computer worked.
I like the idea though that just, I mean, and even when I was in school, we did circuit boards. Like we actually built our own like very basic calculator. We didn't do anything that fancy, but it was something that could do basic arithmetic and math, and coding to a degree, as you said, kind of meant both knowing hardware and software. Because the hardware was simple-ish enough that, and modifiable just with hand versus the labs that are building stuff down to the micron now. But it's an interesting, I think, from what I've read up, is the story of your transition to playing on with those. I think you had bought the like it was the Microsoft teaching tutor or typing tutor was one of the earlier things that you got, and I read a fun anecdotal story that was on the Microsoft website of the fact that there it was kind of like a full circle coming back to that, because that was one of the early devices that you modified, and then coming to actually work on the Microsoft campus and then seeing a display of one of their like iconic early things that they built as a company.
Yeah, so it's kind of was so weird because I was doing all this stuff. So as you said, on the Apple II there was this touch typing tutor that I don't think anybody today is trying to do touch typing, but at the time, typists, and it was a profession called type all there, and it was, I think the year was 1982, and in 1996, what is 14 years later, after the startup I was working in was acquired by Microsoft, when I was giving a tour by one of the people, Microsoft people, tour of the Microsoft
Panorama Systems, right?
Yeah, that was Panorama Software System, and we got acquired. And first time I actually got the tour of the campus, where, hey, that's my new home. And there was, between building 17 and building 16, there is a public square where the tiles in the square all had of them the names of Microsoft products that were released until that time.
Oh, okay.
And so you would walk and you see, oh, this is Windows 1.0 and this is Excel 2.0, and one of those squares had this typing tutor by Microsoft that was released in 1982. It was one of the first squares, and I said, oh my God, I actually pirated the software of Microsoft 14 years before. I had no idea. I forgot even that software came from that software that I took the English software and converted to Hebrew software then sold was actually a Microsoft piece of software. So I was saying, should I say something? Will they actually fire me when they discover that I stole their software 14 years ago? So I would not do that today. But at the time I was, I guess, 16 years old or something like this, and everything was different.
Well, as I mentioned, I think it's a fun like circle of life thing. Coming back to that, it feels like completing the circuit to a degree.
Yeah.
So I want to take this forward about a decade. Like, what ended up from where you arrived at Microsoft to today? You've been involved. It's I think for about 10 years since like Power Pivot, Power View is from what I'm aware of. Being involved in BI and the evolution and progression of it. What got you to switch over from going to, I would say, more like software coding to wanting to work with data and analytics?
Well, I was always on data. Well, I had to say always, but in Panorama Software in Israel, we already went into the BI space, and so since then I've been in the BI space. That's basically 3 decades now that I've been in the BI space, and So the shape of BI changed. The shape of BI moved from executive information system to all up servers to reporting to what to what we know as now today as the modern BI tools. I've always so the technology evolved, and it's been amazing to be part of this industry and part of that journey. And I think today we're going to say, well, you should not be looking at BI in isolation. BI is part of a bigger thing, which is the entire data analytics stack. And so, no, we're going to get to that topic of Fabric at some point, but that's really is all about saying we should not look just at the last mile of delivery of that's what BI systems do, but we should also look at everything that happens upstream from that, from the gathering of the data, the processing of the data, the curation, enrichment, and so forth. That's what we call data engineering, data warehousing, and data integration, and so forth. And we should just think of the entire journey of the data rather than just at the last mile. But it's just natural. And I think the notion of that the scope of what we consider BI has been expanded gradually all the time. That is, I would say 20 years ago, I was working on all up servers. That was it, called SQL Server Analysis Services. And then later on, we added the front end of let's do some visualization, slicing and dicing, and so we had just the idea of this is not a fixed quantity, but gradually we realize that we have to look at it in a more holistic way, and we have to include more of the pieces that generate the value as a whole, rather than looking at them as separate industries and separate products. I think that's been a natural part of the journey, and I think it will continue. I think the expansion will continue into the future.
And I think, I mean, on the idea too of just the value that data can add, because it's been around since, I mean, basically reporting in BI used to be printed. It was quite, something that actually had to be printed on physical paper and would require a lot of time to render the charts and graphs to now something that's agile and interactive. But one of my favorite memes, I guess, that shows up on LinkedIn from professionals is the Lego analogy of data, like unstructured raw data. And it's just a pile of Legos, and then it's categorized, and then it's categorized and sorted, and it just shows you assembling it more and more until it's something that can find value for that. And I really like that visual analysis and tracking. And I know with Fabric, as we might get into, is we have the bronze, silver, gold in terms of processing with that, but there's a degree of like data unstructured and not organized or analyzed is useless for the degree. It just sits there. It's not going to do anything. If you have a deconstructed car, you can't drive it. So I've enjoyed watching at least the evolution of a lot of these platforms to make it easier and easier to arrive at that goal with less friction points to get from the raw data that you're just collecting as an organization to the final touch point for that.
Yeah.
So it's and I think, at least for me, is what I consider almost like the modern version of BI when it starts to get truly interactive was probably the Power View attachment that was for Excel. That was the first like shiny BI tool that Microsoft had, and I still call it the grandfather of Power BI. Though each time I ask in my trainings who's used Power View, less and less hands go up each time in the room. Very pretty platform, had small multiples before Power BI did and all that, but it was incredibly slow, unfortunately, running on Silverlight. It was like Flash. But that's where I feel like that spark for like modern BI really was starting to kick off, and we were getting to those really cool interactive charts. And then the Power BI still uses it, but it's the cross highlight that was I think launched with Power View and everything, that really showed the grand totals and all of that. That just made it seem cool to actually do like data analysis. It was the software that really popped out on the screen.
And it's the same people, by the way. It's not like the same people that built Power View for Excel. And yes, we did it in Silverlight, probably one of the most short-sighted decisions we made at the time. But and then we knew that there was something right about it, but it wasn't in the right place, in the sense of it just didn't fit into the Excel environment well enough. It was too slow. It was kind of and to be very honest, it's very hard to ship software with Excel. Excel itself is an amazing tool, but it's an incredibly mature tool, and Microsoft is incredibly careful not to make stupid moves with Excel. It's so good. There's so much to lose if you make a stupid move. So Microsoft is taking, I would say, very carefully advancing in Excel, enhancing Excel. But at the same time, when you have something that is so dynamic, needs to progress very, very fast, like a new BI tool, tying it to a slow-moving, I would say, aircraft carrier like Excel, it's probably not the best match, because when you have something completely new and you want to innovate and you want to go wild, you need to take risks, and that was really not working very well with the Excel tie that we had at the time. And this is, I think, about 9 years ago, so maybe I forget exactly 9 years ago. There was the decision to basically say we have to separate the two, sever the ties and put BI, let it loose, let it create its own thing. As you know, now today it's called Power BI, but that was a decision, I think, an incredibly insightful decision at the time, but it was controversial. It was controversial. Are we really going to create another tool for analyzing data? We have Excel, which everybody loves. I love Excel, one of the most beloved products in the world. And are we actually going to create an alternative to Excel for analyzing data? And today it seems obvious. Yes, of course, why not? Like it all makes sense. Power BI has its own space, and Excel has its own space. And of course, it seems very obvious today. It wasn't obvious at the time. It absolutely was not obvious at the time. And I like to, we like to call Power BI the PowerPoint for data. And I actually think that there is something very powerful in the way of thinking this way, because it's a relationship. The way I view the relationship between Power BI and Excel is very much like the relationship between PowerPoint and Word. Both PowerPoint and Word are tools that are designed to convey ideas, to communicate ideas. They're just doing it in two different ways. One is more detail-oriented, which is Word, that you have writing a lot of paragraphs with lots of words in them. And it's incredibly, very important. And one is kind of a shorthand version, much more visual, much more storytelling, visual storytelling, and that's PowerPoint. And I think that's exactly the same relationship we have between Power BI and Excel, where Excel is the more detail-oriented. Everything is grid-centric with lots and lots of cells on the grid and so forth. And you give, and it's awesome. And then if you really want to kind of show pictures, show visuals, and so forth, Power BI is so much more appropriate for these kind of experiences. And I think customers naturally understand that. But at the time, it wasn't obvious. It wasn't obvious. We need another place to create charts beyond Excel. Okay.
And I think you've hit on like the good concept of the level of detail. I imagine it almost like flying a plane, like ground level, 0 feet, or at sea level is the data. Excel's analyzing it from maybe the 5,000 foot, 30,000 foot more charts, graphs, trends level is kind of where Power BI is going. But you did hit on a interesting topic, because you knew Rob Colley, I'm assuming, back when he still worked at Microsoft, and he was the last boss I had before I went independent. And I remember him telling me the stories on like even Power Pivot. That was something you actually had to turn on, because the Excel team definitely conflicted with the idea of they didn't want a single item that would make Excel boot up slower. And having that would require a little bit more time for it to start. So like, no, we're not going to have it on by default. You have to go turn it on and find it buried in your add-ons. So it was never an integration for that, BI modeling or direct integration that was just built as much as like an added room to the house that was kind of there, but not completely part of the family. And it seemed like that almost led to a need to want to then put it as its own separate product. But then we also get the monthly updates and all that other stuff, which Office just you don't get nearly as fast of an iteration and evolution.
Yeah, it's we have to understand, Excel is such a fine-tuned machine. It's like a Formula One car, and everything is done so perfectly well in Excel. And like us adding Power Pivot into Excel was a little bit like taking the Formula One car and saying we also want to use it to commute the kids to school. Okay, so it just like it doesn't fit very well.
Yeah. Can you confirm one thing for me? So I have heard that there is still bits of code written by Bill Gates in the code of Excel somewhere in there. Like there are a couple lines that were something that he wrote back in late 90s or mid 90s, but because it's evolved so much over the years that some part of that code base still has old code written by some of the former Microsoft individuals.
I haven't seen the code that Bill Gates wrote, but the story might be true, so I cannot attest. But I will tell you that there are absolutely pieces of code that are 20 and 30 and 40 years old inside the Excel code base. In fact, when we built DAX for the first time, one of the goals that we had was that we wanted to have the basic functions of DAX will be completely Excel compatible. So we actually took some code from Excel for the formulas of the formulas of DAX, like string formulas, numerical, mathematical functions, and we basically copy pasted them into DAX. So we can be guaranteed that we'll have the exact same implementations, that will always get the exact result. So that code that perhaps originated in 1985 somewhere,
that's pretty funny.
probably is now part of Power BI. Okay, probably is now part of Power BI.
Why reinvent the wheel if we can continue to reuse it? I mean, DAX was, of course, like written to be very familiar for people who've already written Excel cell formulas. So I know there was a lot of overlap to kind of evolve it from there. But it's been interesting to watch that journey, certainly for Microsoft, and then go from Power BI Designer into Power BI. And I think that's a good transition also now to talk about like what we're releasing here, Fabric. And I think from a Power BI universe, I've thought a bit about just like what would be like a phrase or a sentence that kind of, for people who are already using Power BI, that this gives the quickest and easiest value. And like data movement is what my brain continues to come back to as like one of the biggest things that can be like an instant win for individuals with the Fabric platform, especially with the OneLake, DirectLake scenarios. But like I'm curious to know like your thoughts on like the description of what is this evolving that's like very, very well as far as pushing the envelope for not necessarily enterprise, like the Coca-Colas can do the machine learnings and all that other stuff, but for like that large market of SMB people, what's that big next shift that this is pushing forward for them, and maybe considering that concept of like data movement?
Yeah, so I think that look, if you're coming from Power BI, and we have millions and millions of people that are coming from Power BI, and you think about what is Fabric? Well, Fabric is Power BI just expanded so much more to cover the thing that happens before the BI journey begins. Okay, so it's how you ingest data and how you process data and how you create database, data warehouses, everything that today you may think, oh, somebody else takes care of that. Somebody in IT takes care of that. They build a data warehouse for me. They know how to ingest the data from all the sources. So the thing that happened before the data gets to you when is a BI user, and you thought it's something's kind of some really hard engineering work that you need to have somebody who went and have computer science degree to go and do the work, and it's only IT people who can do that. All this stuff is now available at the tips of your fingertips. The same BI environment that you had before, you are now empowered to do all of that. And it's also true, by the way, for people who come from the other side, that came from the world of IT, and they were building those pipelines and those data warehouses and those data lakes and all of that. From their perspective, they get an environment that is as easy and productive and as integrated as what you guys are used to from Power BI. So it's kind of both sides meets together in the same place. So the folks coming from Power BI get way more power, and they can skill up and learn new skills. And by the way, many of those skills are incredibly valuable in the market. So it's just an amazing personal opportunity for many of our BI users that they can say, I want to get to the next level of skilling and become a data engineer, perhaps. And you'll find that it's just so natural because it's just Power BI that you can do more with it if you come from that direction. And from the data warehousing side, the engineering IT side, you just find an environment that's deeply integrated, SaaS, software as a service. For these people, for the people coming from IT to work in an environment that is software as a service, is a massive innovation. You come from Power BI, I get it. Okay, so it's always Power BI has always been software as a service. But if you are using any kind of IT platform, it was platform as a service. It requires so much technical knowledge and so much wiring and integration and things that just you wouldn't even think about when you work in a software as a service environment. So, and we bring those two groups of people together to work in a common environment. So, the IT person and the business person, analyst and so forth, they're all collaborating together. And that's really what Fabric is all about. Fabric is all about is bring unification of everything, unification of the technology, unification that you have every technology that you need for analyzing data, from data integration, data engineering, data science, data warehousing, real-time analytics, and of course BI. All of that is one big product. And it is unification of the UI, unification of what we sell. You just buy one thing. Unification of all the personas, and say everybody, data scientists, data engineers, BI analysts, business users, you all together, coming together to one place and work and collaborate together.
And I think it was a very smart choice that was made on leveraging the existing SaaS UI platform that Power BI already had and expanding from that. So as you kind of mentioned, the Power BI was an umbrella before. That umbrella is now much broader with Power BI as a product under the platform, but it's providing that SaaS UI and similar experience. I see parallels with Excel formulas to DAX. You wanted to provide familiarity with people already familiar with the platform, not needing to reinvent a wheel or get anything nearly as complex as the Azure portal, which has 1,000 menus and submenus to go through, which is somebody with a more technical expertise needs to be able is needed to navigate that. So I think that was a very smart choice to basically just expand upon the UI that existed.
So the decision to go with SaaS for these workloads of data warehousing and data engineering and data science was not obvious.
Okay.
Data professionals are used to the world of platform as a service. They are used to the whether you're working in AWS, you're working in Azure, there's a certain class of experiences that they are used to, and you might think that's the way of the world. Nothing can be that's if both Microsoft and Amazon agree that that's how it should be done, then I guess that's how it should be done. But then, as newcomers into that space, when we started Fabric 2 years ago, and virtually 2 years ago to the date we started Fabric, on the journey of Fabric, we didn't know that it was going to be called Fabric. We didn't even know what it's going to do. We just knew we were going to do something new. And this is really to the date, 2 years ago. And when we started that, we came, a lot of the people who, whether it's Arun and I, we all came from the background of SaaS and Power BI, and we came and we looked at, so what do our customers have to do in order to build a project? And we looked at that and say, oh my God, it's so complex. We came from the world of Office, the world of Power BI. We didn't really spend much time on building systems in Azure ourselves, and we started walking through the shoes of the customers. And many of the customers that we had, they took for granted that's the way of the world. Us coming from the world of SaaS is, oh my God, it's so hard. And to convince everybody that it doesn't have to be like this, we actually showed them, we actually recorded the journey of how many steps it takes to put up a system. How many clicks, how many screens, how many everything. We went through the Azure portal, we provisioned a data warehouse and we went, and then we said, okay, that's kind of how it is, and let's see how it could be. And we showed a click-through. There was no code. We call it click-through. That's kind of a mock-up of how it should be done the SaaS way. It was obvious. It was like reduction from 70 clicks to 3 clicks or something like that. It was crazy simplification. And that's where this companies, there's some light bulbs saying, okay, there's something there, right? There's a real problem that we need to solve. And in fact, when we run the survey with all the Synapse customers and say, what would you like? What is the thing that is the biggest pain point for you with Synapse? And we were thinking, oh, they're going to tell us about performance, or they're going to tell us about that we don't have separation between compute and storage. And they did say all these things. But the number one thing that popped up to the top of the priority list of the Synapse customers was complexity. They said, just too complex, just too hard. It's just too many things that we have to do in order to get anything useful done. And so going with the SaaS approach was, again, not obvious, especially when you go to the organization that is so Azure centric and PaaS, platform as a service centric. Today, you look at that Fabric and say, of course, it makes sense. But it wasn't. It wasn't obvious hindsight. 2 years ago. It wasn't obvious. Yeah. 2 years ago.
There's actually a really good question speaking about this that I'm going to pop up here, and I will rephrase it a little bit. That we have like personas and everything else in the SaaS platform that's available. Uh, at the moment today, there's not a ton of configuration options for the people logging in to kind of show or hide certain menu options. And I know even among the MVPs, we've had a couple of chats about that. But considering the topic of complexity and wanting to keep things as simple as possible for anyone logging into the portal, has there been any kind of conversations around that, or any thoughts on having any kind of configurations for that for people to basically show or hide part of the menus and things to look at or poke around in?
Yeah, it's a good question, and something that we're trying to figure out what's the right balance here. The arguments, there are all sorts of arguments for and against the ability to, I would say, what the positive camp is like to configure, and the negative camp will say to restrict what users can do. And I'm generally typically have the tendency to believe that we need to empower users as much as possible. We should not limit their ability to create. And so I would love to see more business users involved more in the curation of data and the integration of data, the enrichment of data, rather than saying, no, you can only create reports and let somebody else do that. And but say, but nobody else wants to do it. Everybody else is busy doing something else. Why can't I do it myself? That's the world of self-service. And by the way, this kind of discussion that we are having on what should be in the self-service realm and what should not be in the self-service realm have been around always. Like even when we went with Power Pivot or we introduced, I remember massive arguments whether BI modeling should be enabled for business users. Should business users be allowed to create their own semantic models, or is it just qualified professionals that should do it, and business users should just be allowed to slice and dice data? And by the way, before that, it was, should users be allowed to slice and dice data, or should they just be reading printed reports, right? So the notion of how much power we give to the creators at the self-service level, that discussion has been always, how permissive or how restrictive we are. We should allow in the platform. And there's no obvious answers, and there has to be checks and balances, and we need to figure out how we do that. So it's absolutely a hot topic for discussions. I don't have clear answers, and I think we will just gauge from what works and what doesn't work, and we'll proceed from there.
And I think you hit on a good point of there's a degree of an intersection of complexity of the tool that's being used and how much self-service tools to provide. So in a semantic model, if built correctly, can be easily used for self-service as long as there's the fields, measures, and everything else just are easy to navigate. And like that, to agree, goes to the person building it. The new tools that we have in Fabric for building a lot of the lake houses and connecting to direct lakes are providing much easier, simpler clicks and access for a lot of people to stand those up themselves versus before this, much harder to build and kind of would have needed to be built by central IT. So I think as the complexity bar is lowered for a lot of these services, that's where I kind of notice it going from central IT to self-service, or the needle between those. And go ahead.
Yeah, and I think that the two motivations that can be, two motivations in this discussion, and they're not the same. And I just want to acknowledge them. One motivation is, why are you exposing the complexity to the business users? And that's a more of a user experience design. That's more of I want to shield my users from being confused. And that's one consideration. The other consideration is, are we taking a risk that the users will do more than they're qualified of doing? That is, they're going to start creating things that they don't know how to do, and then they're going to do the wrong things, and then there's going to be some collateral damage around them because they curated the wrong data and combined it in the wrong way and got the wrong numbers and so forth, right?
Yep.
So it's more of one is let's protect the users, and the other one is let's protect the organizations from the users. Okay, and that both of those arguments were made when we discussed whether semantic modeling should be something that should be part of the self-service. On one hand, there was the argument saying, "Oh, semantic modeling is way too complex. A business user should not know how to. Will never know how to do DAX." And the answer is, some of them will not know, and some of them will. Okay, and they will self-select. And then the other argument was, well, how do we know that this user build of semantic models actually getting the right numbers? And again, here was it's a very valid argument, except that the alternative was, oh, so let's not allow them to do anything when it comes to modeling. What you find is that they'll do it anyway. They'll just do it in their own way. They always find a way. They'll always find a way to self-service, and better give them better tools to do that and provide governance and oversight rather than try to prohibit. And that's really that's always have been the balance of, and we always erred on, let's give the users more power and give the admins more governance power on top of their creations, rather than try to prevent them from being creative at the first place. Because what you get is, when you do that, you always get shadow IT. They need something, they cannot wait for IT, they don't have the budget to hire a highly paid consultant, and so they'll do something. They'll figure out a way to do it. And typically, when you don't give them the right tools, they do it using the wrong tools, and then the risk level is much higher.
I agree, and then, I think you hit on a very important point, that if you restrict self-service too much or access to data too much, people will find a way anyways. But then it's through unofficial paths, it's through exporting and copying data, and a lot of other stuff that causes down the road even more problems for the organization. So
yes.
I do think that we're probably at a point where with any new product, you're swinging the pendulum into the degree of wanting to give as much as possible, and I'm sure somewhere between the two, you'll settle to that happy medium of the right amount of tools that we will, once the telemetry is out there, that's for the expert developers versus the citizen developers.
Yeah. And the question is, how much is it we have to restrict by code versus how much we can just trust the user to self-select? Like, I'm a business user, I have no idea how to write Python in a notebook, so I just won't do that. You know what I mean? I don't have to prohibit you from writing Python in a notebook, because anyway, you're not going to do it because you just don't have the skills. So it's one of the things that's also part of the evaluation, is to figure out, is what will the users self-select naturally, and therefore we don't have to prohibit them from in a hard-coded way, versus things that say this is really dangerous and we should just not allow you to do that even if you want to.
Agreed. And I think also maybe lasering in on a couple of the features that are part of the Fabric platform, I think there's a combination of net new, like this could not be done before, and then kind of as we've talked about already with the platform, but there's a consolidation and simplification. Much of what Fabric is allowing to do now is in a simpler, consolidated, and to a degree a more affordable format for individuals that do not require nearly as much expertise to navigate the Azure portal or anything else. So there's a degree of just simplification of being able to use many of the features that could have been deployed in Fabric with individual services that you have to sign up for separately and all that, but now integrated in the one platform. But there's also sprinkled in there quite a few things that just could not have been done before this platform. And I'll again come back to that idea of data movement. And I think that's one of the biggest game changers for Power BI, certainly. It's just the fact that we now have this OneLake option. We have near import speed DirectLake. But like, what do you see as like, how much of a positive impact and change do you see for a lot of companies with this new feature and the reduction of data movement to be able to have data in a single location and direct connections to it without having to constantly shift that data around anymore?
This is such a powerful concept. I think that the notion of OneLake, and I will admit, OneLake was not there when we started Fabric. It actually took us 6 months to realize that we need something like OneLake. And OneLake is such a powerful concept because it says you have all your data in one place, and in order to use it in different contexts, like I want to run SQL queries on it, I want to do Power BI reporting on it, I want to do some machine learning training on it, I don't have to move it from one engine to another engine to another engine. I can just have the engines work on the same data, the compute engine that we have, work on exactly the same data in one place, in OneLake. And the other thing that is so cool about OneLake, and I think people just, it will take them a while to just wrap their head of what's really going on there. There's only one OneLake. It means that the entire data of the entire organization is in one place. It's organized in workspaces, so it's not like it's all one big pile of data. You don't know what's going on, but it's all organized, which means that there are no more data silos, which means that, my entire data estate, every piece of data, every bit of data can be found in one place. It's indexed, it's searchable. We have the OneLake Data Hub, you can find it. And combining all this data, and this is the other concept, we have so many interesting things that we're doing there in OneLake. Combining data doesn't require you to go and pull data from here and pull data to there and store it together, because I have the shortcuts. So the shortcuts allows you to just point to data wherever it is in OneLake and point to another piece of data wherever it is in OneLake, and suddenly it becomes integrated piece of data without any duplication, extraction, loading, and so forth. So that idea of one copy, and I call it the one copy principle. One copy in the lake is good for everything, and it can be combined with everything. And that's, in my opinion, that's one of the things that are so revolutionary. You mentioned the notion of innovation, what was able to be done before. And one of the analogies I have in my head is, I don't know, I hope some of us are old enough to remember 2007, where Steve Jobs introduced the first iPhone. And and if you think about it, on one hand, it was a watershed event in the mobile industry. Clearly, the iPhone was a completely different animal. But if you actually break it into its parts, you say, well, it makes phone calls. Phone calls we're able to do before. It does messaging. Well, we could do that before. It had a calculator in it. Oh, we could do that as well. So you actually look at the pieces, and so many of the things existed before. They just existed in different forms. So it wasn't really that everything in the iPhone was new. It was how the iPhone delivered these things that was new.
Package.
Yeah, and it's the how. It's how slick it was, how integrated it was, and there was some real piece of innovation in there, like the multi-touch screen. So as you look at Fabric,
one, the pinch,
pinch and zoom, right? All these things, right? So as we're looking at Fabric, I think you'll find the same thing. You say, oh, there are so many things I could have done somehow, somewhere before, but there are also things that are completely new, but the entire package just makes everything different. The level of integration, the level of experience that you have, the unification of everything to one model, it just changes everything. So that's kind of how I think about it.
And I like the analogy with the iPhone. Honestly, like it hits on that idea that the package and the product, and honestly just the ease of use of something to be able to and even like you can now have like tabs open in Fabric to be able to work between different environments and switch between them and all that. It makes setting them up, managing, and everything else just a lot simpler. And going back to that idea that it's primarily a mixture of things that you could do but were harder to implement, more clicks to get to, but also these new items that I think really are going to reduce the data movement, which it can cost a lot of money as far as storage and computing for an organization. But when you have that, one capacity, one tenant scenario, I think it's trying to hit on both simplification, but probably an easier cost management overall, where you really just at this point pay for consumption of the data, right? And a lot less money for the storage of it itself. Storage is cheap as long as it's not being accessed that often. It's really how often are you hitting it, and is it cold archive storage versus hot storage, depending on the amount of times that you're actually sending queries to something.
And the fact that you have this, again, back to this concept of one copy, I don't have to move the same data again. Every time we leave another copy behind. It reduces latency, it reduces the cost, timeliness of and one of the most important thing is you're always, it feels like you're always in control, because you don't say, oh, I have 17 different copies of the same data, and where are all these copies, and are they still all the same? Have they changed on the way because somebody injected something into one or two or seven of those, and you just one. There's just one, and so, and you know what it is, and you know what you change that one copy, and it applies everywhere. So. Yep. So the thing that the mess we live in today, we think that's the way it is. We just have to copy data. We have to move data around. Fabric just takes it away. You don't have to worry about it anymore. You don't never have to do it. And it's Elon Musk's one of his favorite his favorite quotes is my favorite quotes of Elon Musk is, the best part is no part. If you just never have to copy data, you just never have to copy data, never have to have this data duplicates. It's the best you can have. You don't want to have duplicates if you don't have to. And so that's kind of where I think one of the key changes that we are making. And I think that it will take a while for people to realize how different it is than what they were used to before. Because when you take something away that you don't need it anymore, it's natural. You just don't need it. But then you realize when you go back to the old thing, it's a little bit like you use the iPhone and after 2 weeks, everything is natural. You don't even think about it. And then you go back to the Ericsson flip phone and say, oh my God, what an ancient piece of junk, right? So you just got used to the new thing. And only when you go to the old thing, you realize that how different the new thing that you got used to and take for granted is, how much better it is than the old thing. But it takes a while.
And I think just as in conversation around the implication that this means for Power BI, because we talked just like the data is going to be moving a lot less with this stuff, which is all the benefits that we've already mentioned. But I think like two big things in Power BI that have been needed, which are like direct query and large data set formats. I think both of those are going to, like, what people use in this platform are going to drastically go down in terms of the need for those. Direct query has been needed for years when just the data sets are too big, or you need real-time data. That's its own, bag of cats related to complexities with that. But it's never been that fast, just because you have to go from one language to another, and they don't always speak each other's languages very well, so it can be very slow. The need for that using this is going to drop a lot, and then needing to have large Power BI data sets imported into the service to have large data set formats turned on. Then you can't download the PBIX and all that. Again, I think that's going to massively go down with this leverage. So a lot of these other things that existed, I think, as a feature to service certain needs, this is replacing. So I really see a lot of great integrations with this as part of that platform, and then just eliminating pain points that are certainly for every customer I've ever deployed direct query for. There's always so much extra work that goes into that, and having to educate and add those slicers where you can commit all changes to everything, so you're sending less queries to the database. So many different pain points that are being eliminated, I think, for customers, and even for people with not necessarily a very big fact table. Why import it if you have a 20 million row fact table when you can just simply do a direct lake connection and get near parallel performance as import? So I'm excited to start deploying this to a lot of consultants and a lot of clients myself as a consultant, and putting this out going forward. I think the question. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't agree, by the way. The direct query journey, it's almost 3 decades that I've been. Okay. It was called roll-up in the old SQL Server analysis day. In the when we had multidimensional model, relational roll-up. It was always this thing that looked great on paper and never performed the way the end users wanted. So I will tell you, 90% of the users will end up with import modes today, because they just don't like the performance of the direct query. It just and it will never. We can always make it a bit better, but at the heart of it, the relational database is just not designed for the slicing and dicing capability that you need in BI tools. The end user are incredibly impatient. So we built the specialized BI engines to solve that problem. But of course, these BI engines required you to copy the data into the BI engine. And I think for the first time in 3 decades, we have something new that gives you the ability to work on the data warehouse data, but with a BI engine, without having to go and copy the data warehouse data into the BI engine. And that is really the heart of what DirectLake is. And it is a killer feature. It's absolutely a killer feature. And we're not done yet, by the way. We know that we are going to make it even better. I can tell you that there are a lot of people working, and some amazing improvements are coming around for DirectLake as well. But even in its first initial form, it's pretty amazing.
I completely agree, and like you said, it's the ability to just avoid that entire painful. I've never had a single deployment of direct query, and granted, every 20 people who want a direct query, usually only 1 or 2 of them ever gets deployed for, because most of the time they think they want real-time data, and a couple scheduled refreshes can fix that. But I love that conversation will be much less needed now, with this direct data warehouse access, but with the BI engine. I actually just got a really good question here from Simon that I like a lot. So let me bring this up. So given Fabric's breadth of technology from a product development perspective, can you share insights on how your team prevents new features negatively affecting or impacting older ones, kind of like a butterfly effect?
So the way we design Fabric is, it's actually, there are thousands of people working, coding Fabric, okay? So it's a very, very large project. Even in Microsoft scale, Fabric is a gigantic project, okay? So it's kind of like having, I'm not saying it's we're as big as Windows, but we're not that far off, to be very honest, okay? So even just running a project that you have thousands of engineers all working on a single product is very, very challenging organizationally. How do you make sure that you don't, one is not stepping on the toes of the other? How do you make sure that you have a cohesive product? As part of my job is making sure that Fabric turns out to be a product that just feels like one integrated, cohesive product. And if you're not careful, you get what we call hairballs. That things that just everything it's fuzzy. Yeah. It doesn't have personality. It doesn't have common experiences. And I'm not saying we are perfect. We know we have a lot of cleanup to do, but generally, I think that we achieved the goal of creating something that feels like one integrated product with the DNA and personality and things that if you know how to use one part of the product, you feel very comfortable in another part of the product and so forth. So overall, I think it turned out to be very well. But how do we get there? And a lot of it has to do with a balance of it's a little bit like this. We talked about the self-service world of data. It's just now for engineering. How do you make sure that on one hand, you give the creative powers to the individual teams, whether the Spark team with notebooks and data engineering, or it's a data warehousing team, or it's a BI team, or it's a data science team, and so forth, right? So how do you give them the creative freedom to do things on their own without having to worry too much about getting and breaking other people's stuff, okay? And how do you make sure that they are, while they get the creative freedom, you have also some cohesive common behaviors of all these capabilities? And that it's actually the same balance between governance and oversight versus creative freedom and self-service. And that's how really we structure our own team. So every team has a lot of creative freedom, and nobody's going to tell them what features they're going to put into the notebook, because they're the experts, right? At the same time, we put some common guidelines and say, well, this is how every artifact in Fabric needs to behave. This is the experience we expect from all of you. This is, and we will review it. And if we find out that you are kind of breaking the mold, then we'll have a discussion about it and figure out how we can help you correct. So, and then you have to also create this kind of sandbox environment. So say, this is where you can work safely, and whatever you do will only affect your workload in Fabric. You work in Spark, you break something, it will break only in Spark, it will not break anywhere else. So, and other things are very common infrastructure, like OneLake, it's common, okay? So you have to protect OneLake. Only one team can change things in OneLake, and other teams can just use OneLake. And you constantly have to make sure that if the OneLake team changes something, it doesn't break anybody else in the process. So it's really is about kind of knowing how to architect in the proper layers, that, what is a common layer versus what is a workload specific layer, what is that you get creative freedom with, and what do you have to be compliant with the general platform guidelines. How do you communicate it? How do you make sure that people don't feel that there's an oppressive regime of oversight over them, and everything that they do is going to look with the microscopic magnifying glass to make sure that they are compliant. So it's that creating that that balanced organization is a challenge, but I think we did it. I think it's really working, and I think the results are speaking for themselves. Now, hey, we have a long way to go. We're not GA yet. And yes, if you're using the product, you'll find some inconsistencies, and you'll find something that are imperfect yet, and sometimes things that still have to be fixed. But overall, I think we found a good balance. And it's not very different, by the way, than the balance that I guess the Office team has, where Excel, Word, PowerPoint, and so forth all have their creative freedom, but at the same time, it still felt like one cohesive Office suite. Like they all have the same ribbon and the same home tab in the ribbon, the same insert tab in the ribbon. Like, so having commonality while not taking away the creative ability of the individual teams.
I agree, and I think leveraging that UI and platform that already existed with Power BI and scaling that out helped to kind of prevent that toe stepping to a degree as this continues to evolve. But being in public preview now is going to give you a lot of telemetry and feedback from users to soften and polish those any sharp edges that might be left as this continues to evolve going forward.
And there are some sharp edges, and even when we get to GA, there will still be remaining sharp edges, but
fair.
We'll fix them. We are committed to fixing all of them.
I am curious as well, like, so from the perspective of like the citizen developer, or for smaller companies where there's that one person who wears the IT, the BI, the analyst hat and everything else, considering there's, a good like dozen or so new features, new items, things to explore, what would you recommend people exploring as like sitting down and learning this portion of Fabric or anything related to that as, as a one of the highest payouts for for the limited time they might have to do self-learning as they're exploring this new platform?
Yeah, so I would say a couple of things. Number one is if you're working in a department or you're working on a small medium business, that is Fabric is an amazing value proposition because the entry point for Fabric is a couple of $100 a month. I think when we have the reserve instance, will be like something close to about $160 per month in North America. And you get everything in Fabric, everything. It's an entire analytics platform, data warehouse, data engineering, data science, BI, data integration, real time, everything for a one small price of the F2 capacity. So I just expect virtually everyone who it was more than just, virtually everyone to just have at least an F2 capacity. It's so cheap, and you get a complete analytics platform. So, and that's a big change because if you come from Power BI, you know that capacities are starting at $5,000 a month, and this is going to be 1/30th of that, okay, or 1/32nd of that, okay. It's incredible. Just the ability to get the entire analytics platform, everything you need, soup to nuts, for basically 8 Power BI premium per user licenses. That's really how that's not for one users. That's for the entire installation. So entry point is very, very small. So don't be afraid. Don't think, it's just for the big guys. It's just for people who have Power BI premium and are spending $5,000 a month. It's for everybody. We made sure that it's so affordable that there's not a single small business that cannot afford something like that, okay, to start with. And then you say, what should you look at? And I think, look, the OneLake is the heart. OneLake, everything is built on top of OneLake. So, and the best way to master OneLake, in my opinion, is get yourself, is provision a lakehouse. Lakehouses are so easy. They're just file systems. There's a, if you look at the lakehouse, what's inside, there's a file section, which is really just a file system, and then there's a table section where you take the files and make them into tables. And it's so simple. And then you use Data Flows Gen 2 to feed the data into the lakehouse, and you're good to go. You already have something. You already created something that in the past required a data engineer to do for you, because, oh my God, data lakes are so complex, and building lake houses are it's so hard, and you need to be a data engineer to do. Not anymore. It's just so easy. And the moment you have that, you get the first handle on OneLake and the lake house and Dataflow Gen 2, which Dataflow Gen 1, you already kind of know 95% of the things that you need to know about Dataflow Gen 2. You already have something going, and then you expand from there. And then you can do also the thing, you say, hey, I want to try to see what it means for me to train a machine learning model. I want to see, if I can get some real-time data and see what I can do with that. So there are so many interesting things that you can go expand from that. But at the beginning, I say, get yourself a lakehouse, feed it data from Dataflow Gen 2, and you're already in a great position.
I would agree. And I mean, like, if you're thinking of levels of a house, the OneLake is your basement and foundation. That is everything going in that you build from there. So I think that's a great starting point for anyone. I completely agree with that, because everything else connects to that. Like, most of the other features that are part of Fabric work best and easiest when it's connecting to data already sitting into there. And I know that the labeling has kind of been OneDrive for data to a degree, because you can use the UI to drag and drop files into there. Though there's a little anxiety of the ease of use from that, just from a consultant perspective, because I've just come across so many people who still use OneDrive, but they don't have one file with version history. They have 1.1, 1.1 underscore final underscore final. So my only small fear is I hope that doesn't end up becoming a OneLake scenario for some customers. Granted, that is the architect's somewhat of their responsibility to make sure proper education of how to put data into there is managed. But when I heard OneDrive, I think back to those companies who are still today not using it correctly, even though you have history, they still maintain separate files. So that would be kind of funny if you end up with 35 versions of the same table sitting in OneLake. I do also want to bring up another question here that I had. So let me get back to this. And so John Kursky has a really good question, a little technical one about lineage. But could Fabric provide any column level lineage? So transparency from, say, a DAX measure to the data lake to Power Query to source.
Yeah. So yes, the notion of can we get lineage to work all the way to the column level, that's a request that we get quite often, and we will deliver it. I think the team right now is still trying to make sure that everything we have in Fabric connects to everything else that we have in Fabric. So, the lakehouse is connected to the machine learning model, that is connected to the semantic model, that is connected to the notebooks, like all these things. Just we want to make sure that we really connect all the top level artifacts together. And I think the next level will be to go to the column level. So it's coming. It's not coming in the next 6 months. Okay, so but it's not something that we are saying, oh, nobody cares about it, and we will not do that. It's actually a fairly high priority item on our list. But I said the highest priority item on our list is to ship Fabric to GA, general availability.
And I think both on that note and a little bit on the idea of lineage, and then back to the topic of also OneLake, and somebody brought up a conversation about versioning and everything else. So the Delta format comes with versioning already, but I do think another big keystone of the Fabric platform, and it's something that was released technically for Power BI, but under the Fabric umbrella, is the new Git integrations that we now have, which today we have just like file Git integration, but with Rui Romano, who will actually be on in a couple weeks, talking about the new Power BI for developers. The future is really, really bright for true CI/CD development, and that would actually be my one other suggestion to anybody who's wanted to start learning about more, pro and enterprise level features, is anything and everything related to Git and just Power BI for developer that's coming out. I think both of those are also going to be massive game changers for just the management of data sets, lean and connected reports and everything else, plus also just multi-authoring scenarios and a dozen other features you could list.
The Git integration is going to be such a game changer. It's already a game changer for the BI folks, but all the Fabric artifacts are going to be connected to Git. So it means that you can do versioning of them, and so across the board. And there's something very, very powerful about something here that is the heart of Git. Okay, what is the heart of Git? We have the artifacts in the workspace, and what we're doing when we integrate them with Git, we actually have a format, a readable format that describes the artifact, the definition of the artifact, that we basically extract from the artifact and push it into Git. So if you actually go to Git and look and say, okay, how does a Power BI report look like? you see a bunch of text that describe all the visuals of the report. You go how Power BI data set looks like. You see there a TMDL string that is actually describing how the data is constructed. But we'll do it for everything. We'll do it for data warehouses. So you go to Git and see, here's my data warehouse structure. It's just described as textual representation in Git. So that textual representation is going to be something that is going to be available for every artifact in Git. And every artifact will have the ability to both export the representation into Git or import it from Git and instantiate another artifact. Now, that textual representation, if you think about it, can do all sorts of other interesting things. I'll give you one example. I want to do copy-paste of an artifact. What is copy-paste? Copy-paste basically says go to the artifact. When I say copy, export out the textual representation. And when I go to another place, I say paste, take the textual representation that I copied into the clipboard and reinstantiate it as a new artifact in another workspace, perhaps, or in the same workspace under another name. So the idea of being right-click, copy-paste is something that will be enabled for all Fabric artifacts the moment I have that Git integration. So you might not connect in your head that copy-paste has anything to do with Git, but it does. It's the same underlying mechanism. So all sorts of other features of that nature will come about. It's so that Git integration is actually based on a very fundamental concept of that import-export definitions that you're going to see them applied in 6 different ways in the product. The same concept.
And in a lot of ways, Donald gave a shout out to Matthias Tierbach as well in the chat, but it's been really nice to see, I think, his assistance in some of the faster evolution that we've had towards the kind of code-based management and development of a lot of especially the metadata and the BISM files and schemas that we have for Power BI. What led to to a degree, probably some conversations around these Git integrations, the Power BI for developers and everything else from that Power BI perspective. So I do really appreciate the work that he helped with the desktop hardening for all of those into the Power BI environment. And yeah, it's been interesting. He was on my stream 16 months ago, and I think I got a recommendation from another friend of this person I hadn't met before, and he has this cool plugin for tool for Power BI, PBI tools, and like you should get him to do a stream. And a year and a half later, he's hanging out at Microsoft campus doing close integration with the product team. So I think that was a fun journey to watch him lead up to that and working with Rui and all these changes.
Absolutely.
And the mentioning to some of the individuals who are in the chat, if you have any remaining questions, drop them in here now. We'll probably wrap up at about 10 minutes. But I think to the conversation of artifacts, pushing this to Git and everything else, for the evolution of deployment pipelines as well, to confirm, I'm guessing the plan for that of any artifacts that can kind of exist within the workspaces or within the Fabric platform will probably, I'm assuming there'll be very tight integration as well with deployment pipelines to have those, yeah?
Absolutely. And I think that what you'll see also how deployment pipelines is getting very closely aligned with the Git implementation as well. So here are some things that you can think about will come into the product as the Git implementation is maturing. You'll be able to go to a workspace and say create a new branch. And when you say create a new branch, it's not just a branch in Git. What you get is a new workspace, a branch workspace, and a branch in Git. And the branch in Git is populating the new workspace. And now you have your own isolated runtime environment in the new workspace that is for building the new feature and making the schema changes. It's all completely isolated from the main branch that you're working on. So now you have 2 workspaces and they're completely isolated. Each one of them has its own data, and you can work freely. And if you like what you complete the job and you're ready to go, you basically now commit the changes and sync them back into the main branch. But the idea of a branch workspace is the idea that you can work in complete isolation from the main workspace, and the branch workspace is complete runtime environment. Now, if you think about the branch workspace versus the main workspace, and it's very similar to the relationship between the main workspace for development and the test workspace, and the production workspace. So all these things are just different stages of your application. Essentially, that's a way to think about what's happening inside a workspace. A workspace is a project or application, and so you get these isolated runtimes, and the code or your definition or the artifact is moving from one workspace to the next workspace to the next workspace to the next workspace. And that's kind of how we implemented deployment pipelines. That's how branching for Git will happen. And the same architecture will be applicable across as a uniform architecture to both deployment pipelines and branching versioning Git.
And I love your description of the fact like at a workspace level you can easily branch and then it automatically gets inherited, all those things, but it gives you the an isolated sandbox to test those out, even outside of deployment pipelines. So it's
yes, exactly.
So it's an easy way to poke around and break stuff if you need to, and test out those new features, changes, or anything else. So I think the Git as a platform, or not necessarily a platform, but as a tool, is going to be much more understood by a lot more companies, because everyone in tech has heard of the term, but a lot of people are still kind of like, I just know that it has to do with managing, merging, separating, and isolating, but I'm not really sure what it is. But I think this is going to be that thing that's going to take it from, it's been slowly growing to companies where it's going to start skyrocketing up now that we have a UI and a very clean direct integration without having to use third-party tools to do this.
Absolutely.
Beautiful. I do want to be cognizant of time for you, and I haven't seen too many things else in the chat, but I've really appreciated this conversation today. It's been fun to do some deep dives into a lot of this, get both some high-level visions of the future of what Fabric is as a definition for how the platform is going to be growing. And then it's like I mentioned at the beginning, I think it's been interesting of kind of your evolution to get to where you are today, and your journey into up to the point of launching. I think, as Satya had mentioned, this is the biggest thing that's come out for Microsoft since the announcement of SQL Server, correct?
This is the biggest things that happened since the announcement of SQL servers, and before that as well.
and before that, yeah. I mean, especially for data.
Okay. It is as big as it can come, and I would say also, stay tuned. We are just at the very beginning of the journey. Many other big things are coming into Fabric. Things are just as big as the initial launch. So it's not, you see Fabric today, it's exciting, it's breakthrough, but it's the iPhone 1.0. We already know how iPhone 7 is going to look like. And believe me, it's very different than the iPhone 1.0. Okay? So we already see what's coming into Fabric, and you ain't seen nothing yet.
There's one last question that popped up, and I think we'll use this and finish off for the day then. It's a very interesting one too. So have there been any considerations of making certain custom Power Query functions elevated to an artifact level so that Git could be applied for custom functions and deployment? So almost like using Power Query to actually configure automated configurations within I guess a Git platformer scenario. Very interesting thing to think about.
To be honest, I don't think we have thought about that specific thing. Look, Power Query itself is an artifact called data flows, right? So, okay, so by itself, Power Query has it. Power Query functions, you're talking about the custom functions. Okay, maybe, oh yes. So will we have custom functions? Okay, yes. The answer is yes. We are going to have custom functions. So I think the question is not about Power Query itself, but about the custom functions. And we will have the ability to define functions in Fabric, and those functions will be callable from Power Query and from other things as well, like Data Activator, for example, right? You saw Data Activator, some demos. We haven't released it yet. It's going to come in a couple of months, and you're going to be able to use it. But you say, if you recall if you recall the demo, a Data Activator is monitoring your data in OneLake, or data is coming in real time, and then when it takes a certain pattern that happened, it can trigger an action, and that action can be calling a Power Automate, for example, Power Automate flow. But how about it can call also a function? So the ability to create a function that say, okay, when this happened, run the following code, is something that we are going to allow you to do. So the ability to create functions and call into functions is something that is going to be available.
Okay, yeah, I know that good reframe on that. I was thinking about it from the other perspective. That I can imagine I can see a lot of people coming up with some really unique and kind of Rube Goldberg devised scenarios with some of those things for sure. So great. It's perfect. And I think with that, what I'll do is wrap up for the day. But this has been, like I said, really great. I really appreciate you coming on for this, and the conversation has taken a lot of fun turns, and I think given people a lot of things to think about and takeaways. But just as a summary for the individuals in the call, I think between Amir and I, the two primary things that we recommend starting with is going to be definitely OneLake. Above and all else, getting familiar with that, because everything else is downstream from there as far as features and access, and then learning about like Git and all the considerations and branching that you can do both at the workspace or the artifact level, and just providing better quality versioning for all of your objects and artifacts in the service will both be two big things that will help upgrade your, I think, environments. And a 30 to 60-day trial, it sounds like. Alex Powers, I'm just quoting from what he had in the chat, because somebody mentioned that they had a 30-day trial. They opened their computer up a couple of days ago. It was moved to 60. Apparently, the trials are automatically being extended for people who are actively exploring it, based on Alex Powers' message in the chat. So it seems like they're encouraging people to go poke around, try the free trial, get familiar with Fabric, and then hopefully sign up for it. So
Yes.
there are good, healthy trial periods to explore this stuff.
Yes, absolutely.
But yeah, Amir, with that, I want to thank you so much for coming on, taking time out of your Friday, and I hope you have a good weekend as well.
Thank you so much, Rich, for having me. It was a pleasure.
All right, cheers.